Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is for those people who have their natal moon in the 12th house of their astrological chart. If you only knew how many times I have stopped and started this video, including doing one version where I had already gotten to 20 minutes into the reading. So something is like just making it hard for me just to finish this. And maybe it's because this is a very sensitive placement. And so I want to express myself in a way that conveys understanding for those people who have the moon here, because I have a tendency to kind of like look at it, look at these placements sometimes as a challenge. Because definitely when you have the moon in the 12th house, there are certain things that you have to do so that you can make sure that you are not perpetuating a particular pattern that is working against you. So let's talk about what the moon represents. The moon represents your emotional nature, and this can be how you express your emotions as well as how you deal with emotions in general coming from other people. And, I think sometimes we don't really think about how we deal with other people's emotions, but it's a really big deal because some people are very easily threatened by other people's more challenging emotions. They become very upset if somebody else is upset. And I think that you might be that kind of person because you're highly, highly sensitive. And so if you're, well, let me just say what the 12th house represents, and then I'll kind of talk about the different elements and what that could entail for this sector. The 12th house is the house of Pisces, and Pisces is a mutable water sign, and Pisces is ruled by Neptune, so this house is ruled by Neptune in the sign of Pisces. And the 12th house is the hidden house. It's the house of the monk, the hermit. It's the house of past lives, the house of karma, the house of, they call it the house of undoing, or self-undoing, I should say. Because this is the house where you can trip yourself up, where you can keep doing things that work against you. It's a house of addiction. This is one example of that. It's a house of escapism because Neptune is a planet of fantasy. And therefore, one of the ways that people escape is through substance abuse, but it's not the only way. It can be through excessive media usage. It can be through relationships. Anything can actually be a way to escape your feelings. And this is a feeling house because it's a water house. Okay, so before I continue, I want to give a shout out to thecodexastrology.com as well as astrologyclub.org. I've been using these two sites to kind of get their take on some of these things for these readings, and it's been quite helpful. Obviously, at this point in the game, I already know what each house represents, but it's always nice to just see what they say, and every site will not say exactly what another site says, so it's good to always get multiple sources. And of course, I've been reading books about astrology for years and years before I even was going to do this sort of thing, so it's great to just read up on things that you're interested in. And I want to give them a shout out for providing us this information. So the thing about the 12th house is that it's a house, because it's the house of the hermit, we could say it's a house of being retiring. Now, I wish I could remember if it was which site it is. I guess it doesn't matter since I've acknowledged them both. But I could have sworn, yeah, it was definitely one of them, was saying that the moon in the 12th can make the person want to work behind the scenes. And I'm kind of questioning that because I have heard that more with the sun, So the moon is different than the sun, obviously, or they would be the same thing. And the sun is more of what you aspire to be, especially like, in the world, in this lifetime. The moon is more instinctive. It's more, I would say it's more karmic. It has more of a history behind it. Maybe, who knows? Maybe like past life. But that sense of what your kind of patterns are. I don't like to say personality, but just the ways that you do things. Because one thing about the moon in the 12th house is it can be phobias. And that to me, a lot of times can be past life influences. If you can't pinpoint a trauma in this lifetime and nobody that you know who has known you, like your parents, can't tell you why you're afraid of water, it could be from a past life, and it might be some cellular memory or Akashic records memory, I guess would be more like it, that makes it so that you just naturally have an aversion to that. But the sun is kind of like your ambitions and things that are related to this lifetime. And so I think that people with the sun in the 12th house are more likely to want to work behind the scenes. The people with the moon in the 12th house may hide their feelings. I see it. But you know what? Sometimes these things kind of like, these influences seem to kind of like are interchangeable to some degree. So maybe I shouldn't get too strict about it. So this is the house of the unconscious mind, okay? And so the unconscious mind, and I've also read the subconscious mind. So, sometimes I don't know the difference about that. I would say the unconscious mind is more about past lives. So it really is deeply, deeply unconscious. And subconscious means it's below the surface, but it's still more active within us, because it is from this lifetime. I don't know if that's correct, but that's how I feel about it. So there's more of a psychological component from childhood, perhaps, including infancy, that I would associate with the subconscious mind. But we could also, to me, talk about the subconscious mind as a shadow, which is an 8th house kind of a deal. Sometimes the 8th and the 12th houses have similar components to them. But the 12th house, because Pisces and Neptune are, associated with it, there's a sense of suffering, martyrdom, in the negative connotation. This is a house of imprisonment. And you could even say sometimes there is such a thing as false imprisonment, where people are accused of crimes they didn't commit. Now, that's the ultimate form of suffering. The Christ complex of being, sacrificed, or feeling like a sacrificial lamb in your life, abuse. I mean, they don't say anything about direct abuse, but I think that it is more of, to me, the victimhood that we associate with Pisces, that to me has a karmic connection to it. This is the karmic house. It's the last house. So the affairs of the 12th house can have I was going to say a multi-generational influence, but, what do you say, multi-lifetime influence? And therefore, it can be hard, it can be hazy to pinpoint things. This is a house of dissolving rather than, that sense of solidity. And that's associated with Neptune, the fog. Neptune can represent confusion. And so people with this placement with the moon can have an incredibly empathic, very impressionable nature where the person is very much influenced by those around him. But in this house, it can be even coming from unknown sources, because it's like, as I said, there are no boundaries in the 12th house. So the person has to be very aware of this, consciously aware of this, so that they can be more discriminating in who they associate with, because this can indicate somebody who may be indiscriminate with their heart. This is like having the moon in Pisces. And I notice whether it's the moon in Pisces or Venus in Pisces with relationships, or with a hard angle from Venus to Neptune, when I'm doing personal readings, is that sometimes people get involved in these relationships. They can be abusive, but they don't have to be dramatically abusive. They can simply be relationships where they are the ones who are giving fully in the relationship, or maybe excessively giving, and the other person is just taking. And there's an imbalance there. There's a sense of, in some cases, outright exploitation, and or like, how would you put that? Yeah, like where the person might be using them for something, and therefore there's not a return of the emotional investment. They don't feel the same way as that person feels towards them. And it's almost, sometimes I observe this. Now I'm talking also about moon in Pisces, or Venus in Pisces, that it's almost, sometimes I almost wonder if they choose this willingly in a strange way as a masochist. I think there's like a masochistic tendency with that placement of the moon. Now, can we say the same about the moon in the 12th house? Possibly. Not necessarily that they are like saying, boy, I really want to have a one-sided relationship. But because they have a self-sacrificial nature, they may, some of you may have a hard time getting intimate with a partner emotionally, because you may have, I would call it like having trust issues. And also there is that solitary vibe that comes from the moon in the 12th house. Even though I don't necessarily believe that this has to be working behind the scenes, it can be somebody who is so emotionally, fragile, I'll just say vulnerable, that they find that it's very hard to function in the world in the way that a lot of other people do, where you might look at other people and say, how do they do that? How do they, how come they're so extroverted, and how come they're not afraid of being made fun of, or of being, rejected? That rejection might be a big deal. And I thought it was kind of interesting that neither one of these sites mentioned the concept of the 12th house moon person feeling unloved, or at least I didn't see it. You know how it is when you're reading things online, you tend to kind of skim rather than read very thoroughly. But I think that's a huge piece in this. I think that this is what I was going to say. Even though I don't give advice, I think this is kind of like a no-brainer. It's not really anything revolutionary. The idea of not feeling sorry for yourself, even if you have evidence to support doing so. Because somebody with the moon in the 12th house can say, nobody understands me, they don't understand my feelings, they don't reciprocate my feelings. It doesn't have to be just a romantic partner either. My kids don't call me enough. My friends are too busy these days, wah, 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 that kind of thing. Where there's that sense of, I'm not getting my emotional needs met. And this may stem from a time when you really, really needed that. Um, I didn't come up with this, I don't think, so I can't claim it. I think I read this someplace that, the emotional needs that somebody has as an adult, they really need it as a child, and they can never replicate it or make up for it, I should say, as an adult, because it was specific to that time and place. So, in other words, now that you're an adult, you have to make an effort to get your own needs met through self-love, self-care, and choosing your path wisely in general, choosing the people that you choose to hang with, and not, in addition to it being unpleasant to hang around people that take you for granted, it also reinforces the very thing that you don't want to have as your reality. So those are two good reasons to make better choices and cultivate that sense of what it is that you're deserving. Because I honestly believe that when somebody has the moon in the 12th house, they may think that their happiness should come after everybody else is happy. And that is highly problematic. I think that when we are not happy and we're trying to show up for other people's lives, we're operating from an empty vessel. We're not going to be our best, because there are a lot of things that we feel we don't have within ourselves to give to ourselves, I should say. So even if you cringe at the idea of giving yourself the same loving care that you would give to somebody else, look at it as a way to benefit others. If you can't do it towards yourself just by, wanting to do it, think of it as helping others, because some of you will be very emotionally sacrificial, but there might be lurking behind all of that the desire to get loved. And then if it doesn't happen, then you're going to whine and say, nobody loves me, nobody cares. And another challenging piece in this is that people may care, they just may not love you the way that you think you need to be loved. As a Pisces, a water sign, you may be looking for a very richly emotional relationship, and some people are much more matter of fact, and they may care, but they may do so pragmatically. I'm thinking about me. I have the moon in Virgo, not in my 12th house. But if I were to interact with you, you might think that I was being too indifferent to your pain by suggesting solutions. And it's one of those things that, I was going to say, pardon my French here, but I was going to say, maybe you want me to sit in your shit with you. And the thing is that Pisces people may be willing to sit in other people's shit with them. And that might be your way of trying to merge with them. Maybe it's not even trying, it just happens that you feel it's like everything sad that's happening to the people that you love, it might as well have happened to you, because that's how empathic you are. But realize that not everybody has those types of emotions, and that's going to play into that can create emotional misunderstanding. So you probably need to have more emotional independence, as well as to have this have a more objective view of others trying to relate to you. Now, some of them may be not right for you. Some of them may be neglectful. And that means that it's your responsibility to limit or eliminate those relationships from your life, but not to complain about it like the victim, because that's not going to solve anything. The 12th house, because it can be a house of, because Pisces and its ruler Neptune rule this house, there may be a sense of learned helplessness where there's very kind of a fatalism that the person has emotionally, like that they're destined to experience this or that. And one of the things that one of these sites mentioned is about how, well, they Codex mentioned osmosis. That's a great word, of the feelings of the people that they surround themselves with, but also hypnotism, being able to go very easily, being very suggestible, going into a trance. So this is in a relationship with somebody who's a gaslighter, who tells you, oh, you're too sensitive, you're imagining things. You might be easily brainwashed or manipulated by such a person because of that pliable nature. And so it's very important that you set boundaries, that you have a code. Well, I was going to say have a code of ethics. Well, that's a given, but also have a code of conduct that you expect from the other person, so that you're not just tolerating any nonsense. Those who have the moon in the 12th house are, like I said, this can be somebody who has phobias, who's very fearful. I could see somebody with extreme social anxiety. So when I said that thing about, I don't necessarily think it's about working behind the scenes. I definitely think that the person could isolate themselves because they feel very, they feel like they're just like so vulnerable, and it might make them very self-conscious. And this is the house, I will say that this is the house of hidden enemies. So there might be some logical reason why you fear that you might be a target of negativity from others, because you may have been like persecuted in some way on the emotional level. And by the way, I want to say that the mother has to be mentioned here, because the moon represents the mother. Now, similar to somebody who has the moon in Pisces, to have the moon in the 12th house may mean that the mother exhibits some of the traits that the 12th house represents. The mother may have mental illness. The mother may have an addiction. The mother may have been hospitalized or imprisoned. And the 12th house can even be like, I think they said like criminal behavior. So it could be like, and it's, of course, it's a house of secrets. But I was looking for that. Oh, well, they said that it can be also like love, kind of like some kind of a love situation that is illicit in some way, maybe just like Venus in the 12th, some kind of an affair. And maybe the person does fall in love with people who they have to see in clandestine situations. But going back to the mother could have been somebody who suffered from depression. The mother may even be seen by the individual as their enemy, but they might not be able to pinpoint this. And I would say An example of this would be if your moon is in Scorpio or Taurus, and you're a woman, your mother may have competed with you. And I'm trying to think if the moon in Libra would also qualify, but especially with Taurus and Scorpio, because these are already, especially with Scorpio, the controlling factor, the wanting to, absorb that, devour the daughter. And when the daughter becomes a teenager, the seething jealous or envy of seeing the daughter getting male attention, maybe even by the mother's boyfriend, and that kind of thing can lead the mother to perceive the daughter as a threat and do things that are very destructive, but perhaps not in a overt way. Yeah, maybe even with Scorpio, might be in an overt way. It might have to be something more subtle than that. But in any case, I suppose it can be any sign. If you have a mother with the moon in Pisces or Libra, maybe Taurus, she may have been overly interested in relationships if she was not married to your father, and just going from one man to the next, and very insecure in that way, and maybe there was some kind of underlying mental illness that led her to be that way. And that is the thing that the daughter perceives as the mother being a very vulnerable, fragile individual. It's like the moon in Pisces, a tragic figure, okay? And that can lead to various reactions from the child. And this can apply to males as well, because that can affect their attitudes towards women, where the mother is seen as weak, as in some cases vain. But this is with Pisces, there will usually be very low self-esteem. The 12th house, I should say. There will be that because the person is too sensitive. There is such a thing as being too sensitive, where they just can't see themselves in a strong way. They feel very exposed, and this can lead to anybody who has the moon in the 12th house can feel that sense of emotional exposure. There may be secretive emotional tendencies where they don't like to reveal their true feelings, especially if the moon is in an air sign. That can lead to kind of like this fake frivolity, where the person is doing this because they want to keep people at bay, and also to cover up their deep emotions, especially the ones that are more challenging. But when they're alone, they may cry their eyes out. So this can give great compassion, though, and I think that this can also be incredibly psychic. This is the house of dreams, and so you might have dreams that are very psychic, although I could imagine that this can be nightmares, yes, especially if you have afflictions to the moon. And a lot of times I think nightmares are common in people who have experienced trauma. I'm talking about frequent nightmares. And so this again is a lot of psychic activity. And so this can be definitely good for somebody who wants to do something intuitively. But it's interesting because one of these sites was noting that this is a less conscious place for these abilities, whereas the eighth house is more, the person is conscious of them, of their interaction with a spiritual dimension. And the 12th house, again, they're kind of like floating or just very, no boundaries, like I said before. What I would say to somebody who has the moon in the 12th house is embrace that compassion that you have and give it freely, but also reserve some of it for yourself. Don't think that you can suffer your way into some kind of beatific bliss, spiritual bliss, that you can get brownie points from God by the amount of suffering that you are engaged in. Try to have a balance between solitude and really making good use of solitude, not as a place to brood and to feel unloved, but to meditate, to get in touch with your higher self. And then also to have the guts to put yourself out there, maybe in spiritual settings where there's a greater likelihood of acceptance of people who are sensitive like you and who are less likely to be, mean-spirited, and also to give your heart in a way that where you can like, I was going to say, be discriminate about who you give your heart to at a deep level. I think that's another thing that gets confused sometimes, is that, of course, we accept our brothers and sisters, the human race, just as they are. We take them as they are, but we don't need to bring everybody to the deepest level with us. That's where we have to kind of separate the kind of relationships we're going to have. And the word discriminate is not a bad word. It's been used to indicate bigotry, but it's actually about discernment, seeing what's good for you in particular. And maybe for somebody else, the same person might be good for them, but not for you. And knowing and honoring your own feelings, and knowing that you have your own feelings, and it doesn't matter if somebody else feels differently about something. You have the right to your feelings. I think that's a big one. People who are empaths tend to attract narcissists. And one reason is because people like us, and even though I don't have this placement, I do think I'm an empath to some degree. I think that we have a tendency to give people the benefit of the doubt, which I think is a good thing, and to give people second chances, third chances, fourth chances. And I wouldn't say not to forgive people or to give people another chance, but to be very observant of how people respond. Some people are genuinely sorry when they have crossed the line, and some people feel entitled to do so. And it's important to be able to see who is doing what and what for what reason, and not to live in this alternate reality, because the 12th house is la la land. Sometimes it can be fantasy, it can be astral projection, but it's certainly not the material world. We know that. So it's not practical, it's not grounded, and it can lead to, in some cases, mistaking fantasy for reality. You may be a very big daydreamer, and that can have a really good side to it, because it can make a person very imaginative. This is great for the artist because it's deriving creativity from the spirit, inspiration, as the late Dr. Dyer would say. And that can be very healing for others. You're a natural healer, so that makes perfect sense. The problem is when the person is like that all the time and they can't discern reality from fantasy. And of course, like I mentioned before with mental illness, I mean, there are some types, dissociative disorders, where the person does have that. They're flipping from one reality to the next, and not having control over it. There's talk that schizophrenia is actually somebody who has great psychic sensitivity, but they don't have control over that. So they're talking to disembodied spirits, but they don't have the ability to turn it on and off. So they're just in that world instead of being in this world when they need to be. So if you can be conscious of, the fact that that is a different world, and reserve it for what it's supposed to be about, which is meditation and, the time of spiritual reflection, then you can also participate in the opposite house, which is the sixth house, and that's the day-to-day life. And you can still be grounded, and so that's an important balance. And really, what I'm talking about here is emotional grounding, where you're realistic emotionally. And again, when you have more of that, then you're not as likely to fall in love with the wrong person, to have these emotional reactions that sometimes are not necessarily coming from who the influences that you think they're coming from. You may be absorbing some random person on the streets, emotion, instead of having that boundary between yourself and others that you can use to be a healer. If you are indiscriminate about it, and that means unconscious about it, really, then you might just be too much having the tendency of absorbing those challenging emotions. But if you really become conscious, you can gain control over it and then put it to best use, and that is being a master healer. So anyway, I hope that this gave you something to think about, and if you would like to kind of explore more of what is in your chart and the effect that it has, and how, just to me, like, even knowing what's going on can be like a way to begin the process of self-empowerment and emotional mastery, so that you don't feel like you're being controlled emotionally, that you really feel like you're in control of your life on all levels. In this particular video, we're talking about emotional mastery, but in the natal chart interpretation, we're looking at, your talents, and sometimes you can see patterns that people may have, and even the attitudes that they possess that make them do what they do. And then, if you believe that you create your own reality, then this is going to be part and parcel of how this all gets, how this is created. So it's a very interesting situation, and in any case, the link to my website is below, and I thank you for listening. Take care. Bye.